Hey everyone, you're with Matthew, you're at the Hub, and we are exploring the principles of our approach of how we share yoga with everybody. So there's a difference. The principles of yoga and the principles of asana don't discriminate, but yoga poses do. Now, I've said in previous episode that means that I think you're trying to, in order to help me feel yoga from inside to out and truly feel like I belong, not just emphasizing the outside of the poses that I can't do, but showing me the infinity and the immensity of what happens on the inside of poses. I think that you have to recognize that the yoga poses are what are discriminatory. So what that means is a whole bunch of things, is that the sensations in the poses are the ones that are going to be more universal, and some of the principles of how asana works. So we've come up with 4 sensations, or in other words, 4 things that you can, aspects of a yoga pose, that we think that if you have these 4 things happening in some degree or another, you have a good yoga pose. Now, this sounds really simple, and it is an attempt at simplification, but recognize something really important is that the sensations we emphasize in our approach are its simplicity. It's a simplifying that actually happens after the complexity of what you know to be in your practice. So in other words, we're simplifying, but it takes a teacher that actually knows the poses in order to simplify like this, like what we simplified down to in terms of sensations. That simplicity can only be conveyed to a student in a way that makes them feel like they belong if you know your poses. I can't emphasize that any more deeply. It's incredibly important. But for us, if you have a sensation of balance, a sensation of grounding, a sensation of expansion, and a sensation of rhythm, you probably are doing yoga. Now let me say those again in a slightly different order. If you have the sensation of grounding, now what grounding means, we're going to explore in so many different little segments you're not going to believe, because there are so many faces to the sensation of grounding and so many ways to bring it about. The sensation of grounding, the sensation of balance. Think about any yoga pose where you're way off balance. Are you actually being able to unify with what's around you? Balance is an inward dimension, forces the practitioner inward, but also creates the conditions of safety for the mind to be able to experience more of not just the yoga pose, but how it integrates with the world around it. So the sensation of grounding, the sensation of balance, the sensation of expansion from inside to out. Very few poses are you trying to shrink. If you are getting smaller in a pose, it's because you're trying to integrate and expand. Now, there's so much to the sensation of expansion and its relationship both to balance and the sensation of grounding. So these sensations are just different aspects of the same thing, and they're all integrated, and we will keep exploring the way that the sensations integrate. And if you don't have some sensation of rhythm, if you're just holding tight and static without there being movement from inside to out, right? Your breath is also a rhythm. You can't hold static in a pose without it quickly transforming into violence. So the 4 sensations that we're going to emphasize in the way that we adapt yoga poses allow us to de-emphasize the outer form of the poses, whether in your practice, whether you're touching the floor in triangle pose or touching your toes in uttanasana, right? But in someone else's practice, we want them to realize what asana, when it's done well, feels like, and de-emphasize the outer form of the pose. Now, that is very different than saying whatever pose you're doing is what yoga is. When I came to yoga at 25, I wanted to belong in yoga and wanted to feel it. I wanted to feel it even though 2/3 of my body was paralyzed. And what you see in our approach is how you teach everybody how to connect from inside to out and how to have certain sensations that allow for an increase of strength, balance, and flexibility. And most importantly, an increase in the sense of unity and belonging. Because I can tell you, when you live with disability, when you live with trauma and loss, something very deep and very subtle has occurred. You don't feel connected as deeply as you used to. You don't feel like you belong. That's part of what's happening and why we just try to not treat people with yoga. We actually try to just help them be a student, help them feel the benefits of asana. So I'm wondering, I'm sure, think in your own experience, what are the places where you really didn't fit, you felt in a yoga class? Maybe it was a class that was too hard for you. Maybe you thought it was too simple. But start to look in your own practice and your own experience with yoga at the places where you felt like you belonged and the places you didn't feel like you belonged. Because at the end of the day, you want to share yoga with your students and you want to make them feel that the seat that they have at the table is just as valid as yours. And it has nothing to do with how much you know. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, please subscribe to our channel.